Addiction operates in the tiniest things that are not recognized as addiction. You can't stop eating the potato chips. And if you watch the movement, they don't do much. And it goes... It's an adding. You're not a lot of nutritional value, or it could be other kinds of junk food. You see, smoking. So food is a big one for many people. You don't only reincarnate into thought streams, you can reincarnate into food. And for a moment it seems to work. You feel a little bit more complete after eating a box of chocolates. I spoke to one person who has a big problem with weight, and he said the mind, he began to observe his own mind, and it always, he came up with one thought that always, the main thought that would justify his going to the fridge and eating was, "You've had a rough time, you deserve a break." And of course every day he was having a rough time. And then he observed that mind movement. Oh. And next time it came, he allowed that mind movement to be there, and he just sat there with it without moving to the fridge, because he recognized that. Kindly throw light on the following 2 points. 1. Why one form loves the other form even when the other form does not love the first form. I know what you mean. We know what you mean. Why is love not reciprocated? Why does one-way love traffic situation arise? I am placing my aching heart before you. Please operate. Thank you. All right, I will begin the operation. Now, one form loves and the other form doesn't reciprocate. Why is that? And the pain that comes with that. Great pain for many people. It's enormous pain. Now, you know that the basic condition of the self, or the egoic self, is one of a very deep-seated sense of lack, of not enough, of not complete. And then it tries to fill through strategies. The mind itself tries to fill that lack that it knows and feels almost continuously, except for brief moments when something has been put in there, and then for a moment the lack is not felt. It never lasts long. So it looks for the next thing, and it looks to the future, it looks to add to me, to fill that hole that is always there, where I'm not myself, I'm not complete, I'm not home, I haven't arrived. And so all kinds of strategies are there. And one of the main areas where it looks to fulfill that lack is in the area of relationship, the other person, he or she. And then, when that happens, the entire focus of the self becomes focused on one other person who is perceived unconsciously as the one who is going to complete me, make me whole. He or she is the one. And so almost an obsessive attachment forms to that image, that form of that person. And that is called falling in love. And sometimes, if you're lucky, the other person feels the same about you, that you are going to complete him or her also. And of course that is great. You both feel that you are going to complete each other. And then probably you will want to get married, sign a contract, just to make sure that for the rest of your life you are going to complete me and you're not going to leave me, because that would have dire consequences if you broke that contract and left me. Don't you even think about it. And then you marry. This is where the films end. The director says cut here, but life goes on. And you marry, and after perhaps even during the honeymoon, the first doubt comes into your mind whether this actually works, whether the other is going to live up to that enormous task of fulfilling and completing you. And then you start an ordinary existence, jobs, family. And gradually, it doesn't seem to be working anymore. The completion, the sense of lack comes back. He or she isn't behaving in the way that he or she should to make me feel complete, make me happy. You read it in ads, I don't know if you read it in India, looking for man or woman to make me happy. Oh, wow. Who could live up to that? And nobody can. And then the lack that was covered up by the temporary delusion that this person was fulfilling you, this person who has a pain body, but you didn't know that. The temporary delusion that this person should be fulfilling you, that suddenly the sense of incompleteness, aloneness, fear, not being just re-emerges. But now, through your mind, you attach that to the other person and say, he or she is the cause for what I feel. You're feeling again the basic egoic condition. You're feeling it more strongly now because for a little while it was covered up by the love relationship. And so gradually, the love then periodically turns into hate. And every time the person is not fulfilling his obligations, or her, the love turns into aggression, hostility. Withdrawal, complete withdrawal. What's wrong with you? Nothing is wrong. Just don't want to talk. Whatever. Or throwing something, whatever they do. And then the relationship fluctuates. For a while it works again. And then it doesn't work. It works again, it doesn't work. And then it becomes, the periods when it doesn't work become longer. And you feel, it feels bad. The happiness of marriage turns into the unhappiness of just coexistence. The happiness of the honeymoon becomes the divorce. And they're all one, really. So it was an attempt to fulfill you through some form, some outer form. And then all that happens in the end, you sense the unfulfillment more strongly, and then you blame that form for causing you that pain. It's egoic pain. This is the pain that arises out of love-hate relationships. Now, the questioner, of course, is not at that stage, because it is one-way traffic, as he puts it. That great love is felt for this form, but it's not reciprocated. What do you do then? Then you feel that lack even more strongly. And it's painful. And there's the tendency for the mind to weave all kinds of fantasies around it, all kinds of stories. And the self gets in there and becomes a very painful self-image of me. And it can then, if that goes on, it can happen that that attraction turns into hate. Can happen. I'm not saying it will happen in your case. And then you see it never was love in the first place. So what is called love is that deep-seated need of the ego. Its focus is on one form. So your opportunity now is to feel what you feel as much as possible. Get out of the mind weaving stories about it, fantasies, images. Be more interested in that unpleasant, painful feeling. And here is where you surrender. What you're really feeling is the egoic state, the egoic condition. And then the image will come up occasionally of that person. And focus on the feeling. Surrender into that. Accept that suffering. And any suffering that you accept in that way will work for you. It transmutes ego. Any suffering that is accepted completely transmutes ego, resolves ego, and also transmutes the suffering itself. So it's an opportunity. If not now, you would have to practice it. If your love were reciprocated, you would have to practice in a couple of years. You would have a year or two of illusion. That's nice. Second question. This form realizes that some actions are wrong. Still, the form does these actions knowing that they are not right. Why? That's the movement of human unconsciousness. Conditioned, egoic mind structures operate, and they have such momentum that they still operate. The question is there a witnessing presence as they operate and those actions are being performed? Or does the witnessing presence come in after the action has been performed? And initially, as presence arises, it will come in after it's happened. You've gone through an unconscious movement, you've said something to someone, you have done something, and it was totally egoic, totally conditioned. Perhaps done it many times before. And millions of other human beings are doing or saying the same thing that you are at this very moment on the planet, performing the same action that you are performing, because it's basically the same human conditioning. In other words, there's nothing personal in it whatsoever. There's no you who did something bad. You is the arising presence. And you watch the movement of unconsciousness, the conditioned. If you watch at first, you can only watch it after it's happened. And then you can fall into the trap of feeling guilty about it, and calling yourself bad. The ego loves that. If you can't call yourself good, we said it before, it'll be very happy calling yourself bad, because at least you know who you are. I'm no good. Oh, okay, now I know who I am. Better than not knowing anything, says the ego. So you can watch that and know it is human unconsciousness. And then as presence arises, you will wake up in the middle of it. And that may happen next time. The same action, the same speech coming out of your mouth. And in the middle of it coming out of your mouth, there is a witnessing presence. And you can see it's like a script, an actor who has been conditioned to perform, to act out that script. And the same many times before, the same strategy, the same, and now there's a witnessing presence there. And that is the beginning. This is now when those structures weaken, become less heavy. The moment the witness arises, those otherwise very heavy structures that you could never hope to get rid of unless you enter a different consciousness, a deeper, the non-conditioned. Suddenly you could be, and then it happens again. It may not be the last time, because there's a momentum to that. And all those other things that you know are there to enhance your sense of self and diminish somebody else's sense of self. Very favorable. One of the favorite ego strategies, the delusions, through diminishing somebody else's sense of self by criticizing, accusing, saying something to hurt. You know it's wrong, you say it happens. And then in that moment the self feels bigger because it has diminished somebody else's self. A lot of suffering in human interactions is caused by that. And it's a form of delusion, of course, because you've only strengthened the delusion in yourself through that. And then suddenly, at first you see it after the event, and then you see it as it happens. And you look through it, you see the madness of it, that you have only strengthened an illusion. And all those things that are connected with ego structures, envy. Envy means you feel diminished in that illusory self because somebody else has or is able to do more than you. Has more of this, is better at that, has a nicer looking that, more knowledge, better appearance. You compare, and then you feel diminished, and then you feel hostility towards that entity that seemed to diminish you. It's all total madness, a total illusion. But it operates as motivating factors in people's lives. And then you try to add something to you to make somebody else feel envious, and then feel the self has grown. Are they looking at me? Is she seeing it? Is he seeing it? Or more subtle as knowledge, spiritual knowledge, even that can be used. Quoting scriptures, "You little worm, you know nothing, let me tell you." So all this, always the attempts through mad strategies to enhance one's sense of self. And all those things, I assume you're referring among those people. So you hurt other people without knowing it. Create suffering for others in the service of self. And it always seems to work for a little while, and then you feel even worse, and you have to do it again. So the only way to get out of that, and I believe that's the question. So I've just explained why you do these things, that was the question. And that's really all you need to know, and just be there when it happens. You can't be there when it happens, be there just after it happened. And don't create an additional identity out of that. Just watch. You're not, it has nothing to do with who you are. You're watching unconsciousness in motion, the human condition. And so, more presence arises. Even in the midst of it, you will be present. And that is the fading out all those movements, structures. That's the beauty of it. One more question. The Enneagram is an old Sufi model of the different aspects, qualities of soul, spirit, being, and their relation to different personality types. Have you studied it? I haven't studied it, but I've looked at it. Somebody gave me a book about it. And there are certain models, certain frameworks, there's another word, it's not coming to me, grids, through which you look. Astrology is another one, and there are others, many others. And you can look, and if they work, and some of them are quite helpful, they highlight those areas in which this particular form is particularly where the concentrations of unconsciousness are greatest. And although I only looked briefly, I spent maybe an hour with that book, and I found it very interesting. So it can be helpful because it highlights areas where unconsciousness particularly, this is the impression I got without really having studied it, but the areas where there's particularly strong blockages, unconsciousness, particularly concentrated here, there, in those areas. So by applying that, it can be helpful. You can perhaps see in yourself where you need to look most. So it is not, there's not one of these that you cannot do without, as presence arises, you will see those things anyway, but it can be a helpful additional tool. And eventually, you let go of that. There's always the danger with any tool that people use that they become attached to the tool and believe a way of looking to be some kind of ultimate truth. To mistake a particular, perhaps a temporarily helpful perspective for the truth. Particularly if it seems to work for you, then you get very much attached to it. But any system through which you interpret reality could be temporarily helpful, and then let go. If this evening we are receiving a visit from Shanti Mai, who has an ashram. She's an American-born spiritual teacher and lives here now, has an ashram nearby, and she's coming with some of her people to perform songs for us, devotional songs. It will be quite beautiful. That reminds me, there were some questions about devotion, but we may come to them tomorrow. Devotion. What's true devotion? All these words, but they're all aspects of one state. I have a strong feeling of devotion, continuously this devotion, not to any one particular thing or form, but when you know your own nothingness, you're in a state of devotion. It's hard to explain. Allow it to be, and this act of allowing, easy to do when you face something beautiful. I allow this beautiful tree with the magnificent colors to be. That's easy. And then you walk one more step and suddenly you think your right foot goes right into the mud. Crunch. And there comes a minor challenge. Can you immediately say, oh, it already has happened, it is already. Not much you can do except, of course, pull your foot out and walk on. But usually, of course, it would lead to a reaction. So some words may then come out of your mouth. Contraction happens, and maybe there could be an immediate attempt to blame someone. This is what the ego likes to do. Something goes wrong, who can I blame? It says the ego. They should have warned people about this. Or if you're in the States, then the favorite thing is go to a lawyer and sue them. So, and this is a beautiful practice. The many things that, in quotation marks, go wrong in your life are actually the greatest things. In a way, even greater than the beautiful trees, because they can take you deeper. And so, to a large extent, the world is here for you to experience things going wrong. And that is the challenge of the world. And if you still think otherwise, you may have lived on this planet for 50, 60 or 70 years and still expect things not to go wrong. And that is the challenge of the world. And if you still think otherwise, you may have lived on this planet for 50, 60 or 70 years and still expect things not to go wrong. Now, the illusion that you can have things not going wrong, you can still live in that illusion if you live in an advanced, industrialized country, perhaps. Travel to India, and you can no longer live in the illusion that things around you are solid and that you are in control. You are not. Nothing that you plan is going to work out. Everything is going to be totally different from the way you expect it. And things will constantly challenge you, forms. And wherever you look, the world is not as solid as it seems to be here. Wherever you go, there are old people, dying people in the street. Are they not? Where are the old and dying people here? I don't see any. They're shut away. We mustn't look. Just pretend that they don't exist. We put them away there. The old go here, and the dying we put them there. And the dead bodies, never look. You must never see a dead. It's very hard, unless you have a very close relative. If you ever want to see a dead body, they won't let you. They say you're mad. But if you are in India, you see dead bodies very easily. It's normal. And so you get a much better sense of the fragile nature of the world of things, objects and forms, how insubstantial this world actually is. And it's only in the West that you have the illusion that the world of form is very substantial, solid, and is going to last. It's there, it has a solidity and permanency. It doesn't. And when sometimes a gigantic man-made form collapses, like 2 years ago in New York, that comes as a dreadful shock to people because it looked so solid and it collapsed. So the world of objects isn't as solid as it seems to be. The world of bodies isn't as permanent and solid as it seems to be. It is very, very fragile, fleeting, insubstantial. So if that's all you know, then you are in this fleeting, insubstantial universe, and there's nothing. And of course, there's constant fear when you identify with that. Even though they try to it's really very much like the Buddha, because the story goes that he was born into great wealth, and his father did not want him to see that there is poverty, that people grow old, and that people die. So he had already reached fairly advanced age. He was, I don't know, can't remember, 25, 30, whatever, and wasn't really aware that there's such a thing as ill, old, and dying people, because he lived in, seems like almost like the West these days, that's shut away. And one day he saw it. His father didn't want him to see it because it had been predicted he would either become a great king or a great spiritual teacher. And the father didn't want him to become a spiritual teacher. He wanted him to carry on the business of being a king. the family business. And so, but the father had made the biggest mistake he could have made. He waited for so long. When finally he did go out, it was such a shock when he saw that people were lying in the streets dying and ill and old, and he saw dead bodies. He said, "What is this? Does this happen? What happened to this man? He's not moving anymore." He said, "He is dead." Dead? Yes. And that happens to everyone? And what's the point in anything? Oh. And soon later, he left everything behind. In the middle of the night, the story goes, when everybody was asleep, and this is a beautiful metaphor, everybody around him was asleep, and he walked out. If that's all there is, so his search then was for that dimension. Is there something else to life than just that? And it lasted a few years. And he tried all the practices, tried to achieve a state of perfection. He got very good at all the practices, and yet they didn't take him to the realization of space consciousness. And one day he almost starved himself to death when he said, "I've had enough." This is my translation of the sutras again. He said, "Enough is enough. Give me some food." And they brought him some food. Most disciples left him. He said, "Oh, he's lost his way. He's eating again." And then he ate normally, and he sat under a tree. And suddenly something happened. All resistance collapsed. He was no longer looking for anything to happen. There was surrender to what is, not looking for some state anymore. And there it was. The last thing that, there's a film, The Little Buddha, which has some nice things in it, although it's too much about the legendary Buddha, but there's still beautiful scenes in it. The last thing that disturbs him is when he's sitting under a tree and he sees his reflection in a little puddle of water. Self-reflection. And he sees his face in the little puddle of water next to him, and he's fascinated by that suddenly. And suddenly an arm comes out of this pool of water and tries to pull him down. And he frees himself, and then the reflection is gone. This is the last attempt by the ego to be there as an object in his consciousness, to see himself as someone, to remain there as an object in his consciousness, a mental object, to making himself into a mental, this is normal consciousness, making himself into a mental object and then have a relationship with it. I love myself. I hate myself. Now, do I really hate myself? I must remind myself on the bathroom mirror that I love myself. I love myself. You have a relationship with yourself. Of course, it's better to love yourself than to hate yourself. It makes life a little easier. But when you love yourself, there's always on the other side the possibility that you might also hate yourself. Better to go beyond loving and hating yourself by not having a relationship with yourself at all. By simply being yourself, and you can only be yourself as space consciousness, not as an object. So anything that goes wrong in your life, a form that appears and you allow it to be, that form becomes an opening into the formless within you. So your spiritual practice is whenever something goes wrong in your life
And luckily enough, it happens a lot. Not saying that you cannot improve your life. You can improve your life greatly. You can create a much better reality for yourself, which is nice. You can create through applying the power of thought and action and visualization. You can improve your life considerably. You can live in a bigger, more beautiful place, feel better about yourself, and so on. But you cannot escape from the other, from arising. Sooner or later, another polarity, no matter what situation you go into. And I'm not saying you shouldn't improve your life. It's great. But do not expect it to be free of the other polarity, which will arise. Even in the mansion, something will go wrong. And that's what the gossip magazines are all about. The gossip magazines are about things going wrong in mansions. And that makes people feel a little bit better about things going on in their little houses. But it's the same. And they love reading about famous people, things going wrong in their lives. Oh, isn't that great? Their lives are all collapsing, just like mine. So one thing that usually happens, that when something goes wrong, it pulls you into the old, it strengthens the reactivity of the old mind structures. There's complaining and running away and shouting and fighting. But there's the possibility, when you recognize the little thing, big thing, going wrong, so to speak, that it isn't really wrong, you work with it. You work with it by not resisting the isness of the suchness. Buddha has this beautiful expression, suchness, the suchness. And you work with that rather than resisting it, allowing the suchness of what is right now, the form that this takes. And if the form that this takes should be a limitation, may seem a limitation on your sense of freedom, your freedom of movement, a limitation on what you want to do, a limitation on where you want to get to, then suddenly something rises up in front of you, a door, a wall. You're trying to go that way, and suddenly there's a closed door, metaphorically speaking, or literally speaking. Once we arrived at a place to give a talk, rented a hall. There was already a long lineup outside. Nobody had the key. And there was nobody there. They had all gone home. So 200 people were lining up. Some were getting angry. I arrived, can't get in. So you're actually faced with a wall. So what do you then start shouting? No, of course you take actions. Can you call somebody? Maybe somebody somewhere has a key and maybe they can come. Okay, somebody did that, but in the meantime, here we are. What was there to do except to cooperate with that moment? So I would just go greet everybody in the lineup, and everybody was very happy. And almost by the time I reached the last person, somebody had arrived with a key, as if it had been planned. And now the strange thing is, when you cooperate and allow something to be that initially looks like an obstacle, initially looks like something has gone wrong, and both little and small, when you allow it to be, it becomes an opening into something that you cannot predict what that is. It changes its face from hostile to benign and helpful. The very event that seemed hostile turns around on the external level very frequently. Even more importantly, on an inner level, the shift happens. But you cannot really separate what happens on the outside from what happens on the inside. The inner shift happens, and then the significance of that situation changes also. So that really is the true spiritual practice, is to work with all the little and big things in one's life that seem to be obstacles or blockages. Whatever arises in the now, I'm not talking about some mental formations in the dream world of thinking. Actual obstacles, actual things going wrong, losing this, missing that, meeting somebody and it's the wrong time, it's the wrong place. And don't try to figure out why this has happened. It's very often, more often than not, it's impossible, because you may now think there must be a deeper reason why this has gone wrong. That's a secondary thing. That if you are to know the deeper reason, you will suddenly be staring you in the face. You can't miss it. But in the meantime, you don't even need to figure out what the deeper reason is. It's enough to allow what is to be and then see what happens. It doesn't prevent you from taking action. If you can take action, you take action. But in the meantime, the form that this moment takes is given space to be. And there's the key. Then that which had looked like an obstacle, a blockage, becomes an opening into space consciousness. So the archetypal image of that that humanity has is the cross. And people misinterpret it, and even Christians don't fully understand the deeper significance of the cross, because the cross is the worst thing that could possibly happen. It's an archetype of suffering. The man on the cross is humanity. The cross is the archetype of suffering. The cross is a torture instrument. The cross means complete helplessness, complete extreme pain. But also, it means surrender. Not my will, but thy will be done. Thy will is the will of the whole that has brought about the form that this moment takes. And then surrender happens, and it's strange that the torture instrument is a symbol for the divine at the same time, and it turns into a symbol for the divine through the act of surrender. Somebody once said, I don't know who, but it is very wise, that which stands in the way is the way. And I said in this book, Stillness Speaks, that which seemed to deny the existence of any transcendental dimension to life becomes an opening into that dimension. Because it sometimes happens that a serious illness, a dreadful disaster in your life, something going dreadfully wrong to someone close to you, it seems to deny any meaning. It destroys often people's belief. Christians sometimes come to me and said, I've lost my faith because this or that has happened to me, or to my wife, or to my children, my son. And I can't just, how could that happen? They don't realize that they were still at a childish stage in their faith. They had some deal with God. If I do the right things, nothing bad. Okay, do we have a deal? I do all the right things, then nothing bad will happen. But that's not how the universe, because what they're saying is no form will ever dissolve in my life. I will not encounter death or the accidental dissolving of some form. And so they came, and it was good that they lost their faith, because then they went deeper. After losing their faith, they realized that that level of faith was childish, although for a while it helped them, and then it didn't work anymore. So they had to lose it and then go deeper to something far more substantial than that, and learn the deep lesson that is there when you totally accept any form of death in your life. Because very often it is that something dissolves, something leaves you, comes to an end, and it looks bad. And then you allow it to be. Now you may not be able to allow it to be immediately. The pain that you feel, the emotional pain, may be there, and there's nothing you can do. You weep. But then you allow that to be. It does not matter where you begin to allow what is to be. Ideally, you allow the form that this moment to be as it is totally, and so there's no rising of any pain. But that is not always possible yet for humans. So sometimes an event like the death of somebody close to you, the death of a parent, the death of a sibling, or even more hard, more difficult, the death of a child, it happens. Forms dissolve in their own time. There's no predicting when a life form, the form, will dissolve. And so pain will come. You may weep, and you may experience that's the sadness. And there you can allow that to be, so that it comes to be space around what you feel. There's a deep allowing of the sadness that you feel, and then there's space around it. And that's how you may feel that the sadness, underneath it, you've already touched the peace underneath the sadness. It's already there. But you have to allow the sadness, not saying, I shouldn't be feeling sad, I should be feeling peace. I shouldn't be feeling sad, I should be allowing this moment. No, but that's not the fact of this moment. The fact of this moment is what you feel at this moment. So the yes to what is, the primary yes is to whatever arises. The secondary yes is the yes to whatever you feel about that which arises. In a smaller example, you're on the road, the car breaks down, a little thing goes wrong, depending what country you're in. In some country, your life may be threatened if you get stranded by the road, or in some big city in North America too, in some parts of big cities. But so it could be a big thing or a relatively small thing. And again, you may succeed in this not so big event to say, that's how it is. And then you face it completely and say, okay, what action can I take? You become still, and then action happens. But it's possible also that you look at the engine and you go, oh, but no, this is not again. And suddenly you become conscious of what you feel, the anger that arises. And then you go, And what can you do? You have to, it is what is. At this moment there's anger. And then comes the secondary allowing. You allow the inner, what is on the inner. You give that space. Because the amazing thing is, whatever emotion is passing through your system, there's always far more space than the emotion. You just have to find it. There's a vast spaciousness in you that is greater than any emotion, that can hold any emotion and allow it to be. It's there. So there's suddenly some space around the anger. You've stepped back from the anger into space. There's always more space than things in space. You can verify that tonight. The sky is maybe clear tonight, still be clear. And you look up into, you go and you say thank you. In that looking, there was stillness. Just thank you. There was no judging. There was just a field of presence. That means you truly met another human being. You connected at a deeper level. And that is only possible when you are not lost or react to the world of form. The form of that person, which is either the person's body, or the person's external appearance, or the person's psychological form. And then you say, whatever, I don't like the way you spoke to me, or whatever, or I like, I don't. A space of no thought, a space of consciousness in the interaction, just looking or listening to what he or she says. But of course the awareness goes beyond the looking and the listening. There's actually a flow of energy between you. There's a totally different energy interaction that would be there when in a normal interaction would be mind energy, just two minds. And here you have very different frequency between two humans. It's peaceful, a peaceful, alive energy field that connects them, in which they momentarily become one. And even if the other human has no idea that what's going on, he or she may simply feel that you are, such a, later and say, that's a nice person. Because the human mind would then personalize it. In your presence, that human being felt suddenly free, not judged. Him or herself, a bit more than usual, felt you didn't impose what normally humans impose on other humans. Similar to a dog or a cat, but better. And so they may even invite you for a cup of tea. Come home with me for a cup of tea. I'd like to be around you. Well, they may not say that because the mind is fearful of true relationship. And depending what country you're in, when you meet a stranger, you will encounter varying degrees of protectiveness, self-protectiveness of the ego. In some countries it's more open, and these are often has very simple causes, like how cold or warm it is. Because if in a cold country, generation and generation in a cold country become tight and there's tension in the body. They have to protect themselves, not only psychologically, but also physically. the two get mixed up. And so in some countries, we talk to a stranger at a bus stop, they take 2 steps backwards. He's talking to me, a stranger. And there's a suspicion immediately, he wants something from me. Because that's the ego thinks in those terms, he wants something from me. Smiling, in some countries it's frowned upon. You're smiling at somebody. In some places where there's still a little bit less mind identification, they smile more. I had a friend from the Philippines, and she came to England for the first time when I was living there. And the first few days and weeks she had great difficulties, because when she was walking along the street she smiled at everybody. And she was quite good looking, so the car screeching to a halt next to her, come in. She didn't want to come in, she was just happy. So I had to tell her, you can't smile here. And that's meeting strangers, being theirs. And then, even more challenging, meeting humans with whom you share a lot of past. The more past you share with them, the more the old behavior patterns will want to come back in. You know that with meeting your parents, your wife, your husband, after many years of marriage. Patterns get very established of who you think he is, who he thinks you are, and the way in which you interact. Or more difficult, meeting your ex-husband or your ex-wife. And be present then and there. And be in the body. So you're meeting human beings without past. Not that you cannot remember certain things they did, but not to bring the past as an active operating principle into the interaction. Meeting everyone without past, just in this moment, through the power of this moment, which is the power of presence, which is who you are. And not meeting the other person as a walking personal history. And that is an enormously liberating thing to do when you can meet even your mother and father, with whom quite a few people, some people have a wonderful relationship with their mother and father, which is beautiful. Some grew up in a relatively conscious family. And many in this world did not grow up in a conscious. Their father and mother were manifesting varying degrees of unconsciousness. And resentment built up over the years, so many between adult children and parents, often there's grievances, resentments, complaints. He doesn't understand me, I get criticized all the time. He doesn't even want to understand me, my father, my mother. And the same reactions happen every time you visit them. And then you have a fight, and then you leave, and next time it happens again. And then one day you meet them, you arrive at the doorstep, and you look at them and feel the inner body at the same time. And then you come in and you sit down, and you look at them, still feeling the inner body, because now it's vital that you're anchored in that now. And then you get the old thing. Your father says, are you still involved in that spiritual airy-fairy nonsense? Still haven't got a job, have you? I told you years ago you should be doing this and that. And then you have to be very present. And just sit there and simply say, well, yes, I'm still doing that, yeah. So. But then he, if it's your father, or she, if it's your mother, after a while will feel a slight disorientation because you are not feeding the old patterns anymore. You're not reacting. And his or her ego will feel there's something missing here. And so it will be hard for them to keep up that playing out that script if the other one isn't playing anymore, isn't reacting anymore, simply stating this is how it is. And you don't even expect anything anymore, because expectations that he or she should behave in a particular way to make me happy is to do with being identified with certain thoughts. That's how things should be. He should understand me so that I can be happy. The whole thing is an illusionary edifice. You won't be happy even when he understands you. It won't make any real difference to you. Now he understands me, so now what? What has changed? Nothing. He doesn't understand me, so it's the same, nothing. So you become free of that which you thought you needed when you were identified with thought. In presence, you don't really need anything, psychologically speaking. You don't need psychological this or that. And there you are, and then you can see the patterns in your mother or father crumbling. And for the first time, perhaps, he or she will ask you a genuine question. What are you really into? What is that? This has happened. People have told me these miracles happen. And if they don't, that's fine too. It doesn't really matter. With presence comes an acceptance, a compassionate acceptance of what is, which very often means what is the human being in front of you. A compassionate giving them space to be, because presence is you have found your inner space or spaciousness, formless consciousness, peace. Great practice is human beings with whom you have a lot of past, you share a lot of past, and maybe were there old grievances, old resistances, old judgments going on for years. And then forgiveness becomes unimportant. I want to forgive whoever it is, but I just can't forgive. Or you feel, I can't forgive him, I'm not going to forgive him, I will let go of the most precious part of my identity if I forgive him. This grievance has kept me going for years, provided 50% of my mind activity and 30% of my verbal output. Grievance related to grief, related to grave, related to heaviness. Strange words will tell you already. The heaviness of a grievance, the lifelessness. And when you're faced with a challenging situation, this happens sometimes in life, you face the situation fully as presence. And you're able then to look, and out of that current of awareness that flows, there's the situation, the current of awareness that flows into the situation is intelligence itself and activates whatever it is that the situation requires. It activates it from within you as a response, action perhaps, words, action. It also activates the total energy field that is the world, that is intelligent. And so things happen suddenly that are helpful factors, because the greater intelligence is operating. Just the right thing happens. Not that the external world can ever provide you with absolute, limitless comfort and joy. That's not its purpose. That is only in the formless consciousness, not in the world of form. So it's in the nature of the world of form that it will, according to the mind, go wrong frequently. But it's not wrong at all. The mind calls it wrong because I expected something else. And some situations need action. Others need simply to be totally accepted. But even situations that require action need to be accepted first as the isness of this moment. You can't argue with that. And then, out of that acceptance, the energy of presence, whatever answer is required comes. This is the same energy that in a very limited area great master sportsmen use when they do their sport, whatever they do. They are in a state of thoughtlessness. They call the zone. That's, maybe a recent expression. They are in the zone. So the zone means in that state where they are at their best because they are not doing it. Power is moving through them, but only in their limited field of hitting that ball. It's usually not in the rest of their life. You may become extremely good at hitting the ball. Big ball, small ball. But I believe this is the reason why people become fascinated with watching certain games, like tennis or whatever, for hours in which, after all, not much is happening. It can go on for hours. Plop, plop, plop. And yet to see how they, out of presence, play, can be a joy. There's nobody there playing. They are at one with the game, totally at one with the process. There's no separate entity. And it's a joy to see it. But one can live like that. It's the same, we've all seen martial arts movies, and if they're good, then you can see that the action arises suddenly out of alert stillness. There's absolute alertness in which there's nobody there as a person. There's only the looking and the alertness. Then action arises and immediately back into stillness. A wave of action and it's gone. The martial arts master never gets angry. That would be an egoic reaction. It would be a diminishment. It comes out of stillness, out of no mind. No mind. Our destiny is to live in that way. Not that we don't think anymore. Thought operates still. It operates when it is needed for certain tasks. It also operates in a harmless way as clouds of thought drifting in and out of your field of awareness as you go about your life, with nice spaces in between. And there comes a thought. The fundamental thing that has changed, there is no longer self in your thoughts. Self, a me, a sense of self. The self goes out of thought. Whereas before, thought was full of self. You were so identified, it became you. And if somebody argued with some thought that you held, you felt personally attacked. Somebody doubted your opinion, said, no, that's not quite right. What do you mean it's not right? You identified with a mental position. Thought had self in it. And if thought has self in it, it's a painful business. It's a painful trap. And thought becomes serious and problematic and creates a problematic life. And there comes the seriousness that every thought that you hold has a heaviness to it because you're totally in it and you totally believe in it. They all believe in their little stories and interpretations, even the collective ones. That's how we see it. They are attacking us. No, we are defending ourselves. They have all their own story. We are the victims. No, they're both the victims. They have their own story. They tell you, and they're totally identified with their interpretation. There is no other. This is the truth. It's self. It has a collective self in it, or it has a personal self in it. And it has a heaviness because there's the delusion of self in thought. And when thought is free of self, because your self has turned out to be a soap bubble, that there was nothing much there, and the true self is presence, the power of presence, the aliveness of presence, the intelligence of presence. The stillness of it is who you are. But not whatever thought comes into your head or the emotion that goes with it. Those are temporary energy fields. So as you become rooted in presence, thought loses its seriousness and its heaviness. And so the thought that remains is either empowered, which you might use to create this or that in the game of creation, not to fulfill myself, to be really fully myself, expecting through it to gain fame and recognition and wealth and blow myself up. I mean, they both go together. First you blow yourself up and then it pops. So thought can be very powerful for creation. It always, before something comes into material form, there's a thought form. But humans will not be allowed to fully utilize the power that is in thought for creating as long as they live in egoic illusion, because what they would create would be hell out of ego. If every ego could create, it would be hell. It's already half hell with a limited power of creation of thoughts. Thought loses its seriousness and it loses its capacity to make you unhappy because you're not totally in it anymore. So little thoughts, they're recognized as there goes a thought, no more. It doesn't get hold of you, grasp you, and you don't get hold of it. And then thought is fine. It's not a problem, it's still there. But it's not the basis of your life anymore, of who you are. No self. As long as there's self in it, there's suffering. And I believe this is probably what the Buddha talked about 2,600 years ago. There's no self in anything. That is the doctrine of anatta. No self. Don't look for yourself in any form, thought form or other form. Anatta, no self. Because if you look for yourself in form, that is suffering. And so the question is, people ask, is there such a thing as reincarnation? Yes, every day. Every time you identify with any form, including a thought or an emotion, and you're totally in it, you have incarnated into a new form. It's become a me. And then comes the next, you incarnate into that, you identify with that, a reaction. You incarnate with the emotion that rises, and what you say, you're totally possessed by the thoughts. Another incarnation. So the question is, how many times each day do I reincarnate? And so, of course, reincarnation is a fact. And when does it end? The end of reincarnation can only come at this moment. When I don't identify with the form that arises. I let it be. The emotion, the thought, some external form, and say, this is mine, don't you touch that. It's bigger than yours. Even children have that already. My dad is stronger than yours. So they talk of the end of the need to reincarnate, the cycle, the continuous cycle of birth. But that cycle ends, of course, if you live under the compulsion to reincarnate every day, it's more than likely that the compulsion will continue. This little entity that believes itself to be separate, consciousness having entered the dream of form, and that's fine from a larger perspective, needs to have more incarnations because it wasn't satisfied with the thousands of incarnations it had in this lifetime. Okay, where's the next one? I need another body. And the drive, the wanting to perpetuate myself as a form is still there. Wanting to stand out as someone, be someone, exist for again. And which is the ego's. The ego's need to stand out. What about me? Me. And even if an ego is timid and doesn't want to, it's just a reversal of that. Hiding underneath that is the need to stand out. A timid ego that doesn't want to stand out, simply it is afraid that it will be criticized when it does stand out and it will suffer defeat. It's afraid of standing out, but it wants to stand out. Is that need to be someone special, ultimately, extraordinary, special, more than. It's always part of that. You can notice it even as giving an opinion. People are talking, and what they're saying is obviously nonsense, so now you begin to speak. Let me tell you how it really is. With presence, you become quite, from the ego's point of view, quite ordinary. The need to be special goes. Oh, that's a big relief. If you don't need to be extraordinary anymore in order to feel that your life is fulfilled. I'm extraordinary. And then you Another thing is eating.
eating is a primordial activity that even very early life forms engage in. Even life forms that have relatively undeveloped organs of perception, they're eating already. And sometimes it's the only thing they are interested in. And so many human beings become completely unconscious when they start eating. Even you can have, I've seen intellectuals at universities, professors, talking the most complex concepts, and then they start eating and they go and then they finish, and then, okay, now let's get back to the problem of existentialist analysis of Immanuel Kant and his theory of the critique of pure reason. So to bring consciousness into that primordial activity, and sometimes to just be conscious of chewing food and swallowing food, and again, not wanting to arrive at the end, because that's another needing. Some people have a so-called problem with eating. It's not really a problem, but they eat more than they need to eat. And that's usually it's the egoic mind needing more, and that can translate itself into taking in more food. It could be other things, often it's other things. If you have a problem with eating, so-called problems, many humans have that these days. It's helpful to, when the impulse to eat comes in between meals, to simply notice it. Now, at what stage you catch the impulse, and it's not only eating, this would apply to any so-called addiction, smoking. At some point the impulse comes, and it's an unconscious movement. I need to take something in. It's with smoking, or drink. And the impulse comes to, there's a lack here, I need. And you have to observe it on an energetic level inside yourself. Don't detach yourself by some thought. Really feel the grasping of it, the neediness of it. I need. And now, how soon you catch that impulse, no matter what it is, depends how alert you are at that moment, how present you are, because the impulse very quickly can pull you into unconsciousness. And some people wake up after they've taken the big sandwich out of the fridge and eaten it, and then they realize they've just been eating a big sandwich. And while they were eating the big sandwich, the mind was somewhere completely different. And then as you become more present, you can catch yourself the moment your hand is in the fridge. And then you feel the grasping, the impulse. And then you stop for a moment and observe that. You don't stop and think, oh, I shouldn't be eating another sandwich. No, that doesn't work. You simply observe the feeling behind it, the lack, the sense of needing to be filled that is behind it. And that needing to be filled is not a physical thing. It may appear as a physical thing, but it is a psychological thing, and it's created by the ego.
which is always in a state of not enough. And others may be running after other things, and for some people it becomes food. Maybe other things for them also. They need more of something to fill that which feels unfulfilled. So I need to more. And then you have the hand in the fridge, and then for a moment you can stop and feel it. Observe what is behind that impulse. Oh, isn't that interesting? And you spend a minute or two just being present with that. And after that, you may still eat it, or you may not. Sometimes it's gone. The desire is gone because you've become conscious. At other times, maybe it's still there and you still can't stop yourself. But you have brought presence to it. And each time you bring presence to something that before was unconscious, presence grows. Even if on an external level you might say, I did not succeed. I did have to. And the cigarette comes the same. If the need to smoke comes, for a moment you observe the wanting behind it and what the wanting behind it feels like. And how it's almost something that lives in you, that wants you to grasp at this now. There's a gap, and you bring presence to that. And then whether you smoke or not, or eat or don't, really is secondary. The success is really determined by whether you can be the witness of your inner state at that moment. That's all. What you then do externally is always secondary. You cannot not change if you bring presence to whatever is there. So you don't need to work on the external level as achieving particular kind of behavior. It's enough to observe what is here now. And so, for some people, that is the beginning of their spiritual path. The beginning of their spiritual path can be an addiction. Food, drink, drug. And then creating suffering in their lives because the body becomes ill. And then forces them into awareness. So any such thing in your life is also helpful. It's not a hindrance anymore. And it's included in what is now. What can you do? That's what you feel at this moment. It is. It's included in your bringing a yes to this moment. An enormous longing for another drink. That's what is. And you watch. And there's suddenly another dimension to it. The watcher. The presence. The formless consciousness. And there's the form. That impulse. That desire. That thought. That emotion. And the space around it, that's who you are. So the more you accept that it's there, the more space around it grows. So to speak, spaciousness comes into your life. So our 3 practices, it's more than that, we'll just give it a little structure. Our 3 practices
by walking. There's a teacher whose name I can never pronounce, Thich Nhat Hanh, or something like that, who has this beautiful saying, the miraculous thing is to take one peaceful step. Peace in every step. That's true. That is not what we imagine miracles are. This is the miraculous thing of bringing peace into this step that I'm taking this moment. There's never anything else. So that's what we work with. Nature and simple actions, including eating. Handling things. Getting dressed. Undress. Not a means to an end in itself. The next moment is not more significant than this one. This one is the only one there is. And so you become a field of presence, which is peace, and that flows into what you do, and that does something to how you do it, to your actions, the way you walk, the way you put something from here to there. Something flows into the doing that is a different energy from the energy that flows into it when you reduce it to a means to an end. The doing becomes more intelligent. This is the real meaning of right action that they have in Buddhism. Right action is not something that you need to or can practice, but something that flows out of being present with what is. If you're not present, you can try to have right action for the rest of your life. For another 50 years, I'm trying right action, just as Christians say, I'm trying to love my neighbor. It's hard, very hard. I just have to try. Right action, or loving your neighbor as yourself, comes out of the state of presence. It naturally flows out of that. And the state of presence is to be with what is. Don't make it into a means to an end. Surrender to now. Surrendered state of consciousness, one with life. And as I may have mentioned yesterday, the little question that you may sometimes want to ask yourself, the question doesn't point to the ultimate truth, but it's an intermediate stage. What is my relationship to the present moment? Ultimately, you are one with it. What is my relationship to the present moment? You can even, if you like things like that, you can put it on it as a little question sticker on your bathroom mirror and the bedroom, so that when you wake up, and your fridge, the TV set, right on top, on the screen. And so when you go towards this, and then of course you may notice, because you just wanted to switch on the hypnotic machine, what is my relationship to the present moment? I want to get away from it. Away from myself. And again, what I
described the impulse that comes when there's some kind of so-called addiction. TV can be very addictive. And there comes the impulse that you can observe in yourself, that needing to watch more. Both the impulse to go there and switch it on the moment you arrive home, and you can observe the resistance to switching it off once it's on. You can observe the mind's desire for more expressing itself as when you say, okay, it's time to go to bed, and then you pick up the remote, and instead of pressing the off button, you say, okay, let's just try that channel. And then that draws you in for a few minutes. And then it goes to the off again. Okay, let's try just that one. And then another, and just flick through. The mind wants more stimulus. And you can observe that. You can observe when you go to a waiting room at the doctor or the dentist and you pick up a magazine, the hunger behind looking through the pages, and you can observe it in others more easily than in yourself when they flick the pages. They are consuming the magazine. The mind is consuming the magazine hungrily. They stay with each page for a few seconds. Occasionally there's a little thing that catches their attention for a minute. And it's very helpful if you can observe that in yourself. It's all to do with the mind's grasping for more. That this moment isn't full enough, I need to put some more into me. I saw a few newspapers around here. Maybe better to leave them alone. But observe the desire to go there and open it. Or if you're lucky, it's in Danish, and many of you don't know Danish, so that's okay. I observed a man, not here. He was picking up a newspaper, really with enormous interest, and beginning to read it. And suddenly, he threw it away in disgust. And I said, what's wrong? He said, it's yesterday's paper, I just saw the date on it. Completely worthless. So modern humans have become consumers of all kinds of things. They consume on every level. They consume the news, they consume entertainment. The big one, entertainment. A word that was even unknown not long ago, entertainment. A gigantic industry. Films. Occasionally you get the truth shining through. Some of it's rare, but it can happen. But a lot of the time, it's pain body entertainment. This is so bad, I love it, says the pain body. This film will make you feel really bad, and then they all come to watch it. To feed their pain bodies through watching dreadful things. Films made by pain bodies for pain bodies. As we sit here, as you sit here, can you sense your own presence? That's not a very good way of putting it, because it's not your own. You don't even exist as a separate entity, as separate from the totality. Can you sense, but let's just for the moment put it like that. Can you sense your own presence? As we sit here, the dimension of silence, which is inner stillness. Simply to notice that there is, apart from the words, there is silence. In other words, the words are the foreground, the silence is the background. And when you notice that there is silence in between and underneath the words, that moment of noticing is the arising of presence in you. The moment you notice silence, you become still inside. It's only because you became still inside that you can even notice that there is silence apart from the words. The strange thing is, thought cannot even notice that there is silence, because thought is noise. So if I ask you the question, can you find out if there is silence in this room apart from the words? If you want to truly answer that question, you have to go, yes. But while you went, you were not thinking. There was an alert presence. Then, of course, when you said yes, that was thought again. That's all right. So whenever you notice, and not only as we sit here, because you may already have noticed, and if you have, that's a clear sign that presence is arising in you, you may already have noticed that there is quite a lot of silence around here, even if you step outside. Especially if you've come from a city, you may notice that strongly, that there is, or in your room, oh, it's very silent here. And if you did notice that, it means how could you have noticed it if you not, for that moment at least, it's enough. There was no thought. If there had been thought, continuous stream of thinking, which is still the destiny of many humans, their fate, you would not even have known it, or without knowing it, you would have felt uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. And you would have jumped to the TV set, if you have one in your room. By the way, I recommend strongly that you don't use it. You would have jumped to the TV set and put it on. Ah, some noise. And you didn't even know why you felt uncomfortable. But if you noticed it, who noticed it? Not you, the mind-made entity, the egoic entity. No, something deeper in you, the presence, the stillness in you noticed it. Otherwise you would not have noticed it. Someone was visiting Thailand. He told me he was visiting monasteries, and he climbed up this hill a long, long way from any city. On the hill he saw a beautiful monastery. He climbed up this hill. He arrived at the top of the hill, entered the monastery. Silence, absolute silence. Monks walking around. He said, "This is paradise. I'm going to stay here." And suddenly, cheap loudspeakers started coming on that were hidden in the trees with the Thai version of kind of pop songs. He said, "This cannot be." And he ran to a monk and said, "What is happening?" He said, "We're expecting a group of lay devotees from Bangkok
and they become very uncomfortable when it's totally silent here. So to make them feel better, we put on that music. So my friend the pilgrim went on. It wasn't paradise. It never is external, if you look for it externally. So the people from Bangkok complained, don't like it here, it's just... There was so much mental noise, it became uncomfortable. So one of the things here during our retreat, essential, absolutely, is to notice the silence, not only while we come together here, also when you walk from one building to another, when you're in your room, or going for a walk in nature. Notice the background of silence, because in nature you have some, yes, beautiful, gentle sounds, and you hear those, you pay attention to that, but you also pay attention to the underlying silence. Then that dimension arises in you, and you can walk there as a walking field of stillness, alert stillness. And no longer walking there, carrying the heaviness of your mind, the noise factory, and the heaviness of your personal history that you need to think about while you're walking in nature. Your problematic life situation, the dilemma of your existence. There's no life situation that is not problematic, and if it's not problematic right now, wait a little and it will turn problematic again. Because whenever you're only identified with that level, that dimension, everything is problematic, and if it's not now, it'll become problematic. I gave the example of the honeymoon. The honeymoon is not problematic, and a little later it turns into problematic. The great job that you just got with a big paycheck is not problematic, and a year later you become sick with stress, or there's so much infighting that it becomes hell. Or in many ways in which situations can turn around and become problematic again, and that's the one damn thing after another. And that's the truth of Buddha, who said, wherever you go, whatever you do, whoever you meet, whatever situation you go into, whatever place you have, whatever, anything, it's dukkha, suffering. If it's not suffering now, just wait. And of course he talked about being lost in the world. So our practice here, to notice the silence. And noticing is enough. Then thoughts come back. And then again there's more alertness. So you will notice as you're here a continuous shift probably between thoughts arising and presence. And if it's 90% thoughts and 10% presence, that's great already, because we're in an evolutionary shift. So the new is arising in you. But as presence arises, the ability to witness thoughts so that thoughts don't overpower you completely grows. Before, in the absence of presence, every thought has you completely in its grip. and the emotion usually comes with it that goes with that thought. And then, as presence arises, comes the ability to notice your thoughts in the same way that you notice an external noise. And then you may notice, oh, there's a lot of noise up here. The noticing comes always from presence, from the stillness. So when you notice that your mind is noisy, wow, it's noisy. How do you know that? Because you have some access to that dimension that is unconditioned. The consciousness that is unconditioned, which is presence. See, we're another little bit. The unconditioned consciousness that is presence. And from there you can see, oh, what your mind is doing. And the mind then is no longer a serious business. You can even start to smile at what it does. It's mechanical. After a while you look through the main strategies of the mind, how it tries to get your attention and so on. There you are again, there it is. The mind becomes depersonalized. Before, the mind was me. The mind and the accumulated memories that make up my personal history was me, and I walked around with the burden of me, with my unfulfilled history, unfulfilled and unfulfilling, not enough. And whatever strange thoughts were associated with that, life passed me by. Unfair, it treated me unfairly. I missed it. Whatever thoughts you have about your personal history. Something went wrong in 1984. It shouldn't have happened. That's why I cannot be happy now. Or you carry an identity based on an unpleasant experience that somebody did to you. You survived, and that's wonderful. Yes, it was dreadful, because as long as humanity is unconscious, totally identified with mind, they do many dreadful things. So you cannot come onto this planet without experiencing dreadful things. Some are more dreadful than others, and you suffer. There's no child that doesn't suffer. And yet, to build an identity on the basis of past pain is a dreadful limitation. To have a painful story that is the story of me, and needing to think about that, because you can't think about it, gradually you might even forget, and need to talk about it continuously, and then see yourself as this or that. You have a label for it. No matter how tragic it was at the time, and some awful things have happened, are happening at this very moment in certain parts of the planet. No matter what it is, the fact is, you survived. And yet the mind used it because it's always looking for a stronger sense of self. It's looking for an identity. It's looking for a stronger me. And it can use something like that, something very bad that happened to me, or the other way around. Something very bad that I did to someone. So that's guilt. You identify with something that you once did. And you wouldn't do it now, but there you didn't know any better. That's why it happened. Unconsciousness. So if you identify with unconsciousness, either that came through you or what other unconscious humans did to you, there you create a heavy, painful sense of self.
as story. But everybody has their story. Even if there's not one big traumatic event in their lives, they have their own story, the personal story, their identity. And how liberating it is to see that it is no more than things that happened. That ultimately that is not who you are. You are not the accumulation of those memories or emotions. That's there, yes. So as presence arises, you recognize that was never who you are. Your personal history has its place, undoubtedly. It happened. You may have old photos to prove it. It really happened. And the photos at some point begin to fade. Even I haven't yet reached old age, but even I have photos from my childhood that are already beginning to fade. They're going yellow. The story is dissolving. Wouldn't it be strange if photos faded more quickly than the human body? And after 10 years you open your photo album and there's nothing left. Wow, that feels good. And yet there is a dimension in every human that was never really touched by what happened. The eternal, timeless state of consciousness that is presence. Who you are underneath the form that your life takes, your life situation, as I sometimes call it. The dilemma of your life situation. You mean other people also have a dilemma? I'm not the only one. Surely no life situation can be more problematic than mine. No story is that fulfilling. If you look behind even those who in the eyes of the world have made it, success, fame, wealth, if you look behind the facade, you see there's unhappiness, sometimes greater than other people, because they still can think they can make it. They have made it, and it hasn't freed them. So here we are, the dimension of form as this retreat center, this gathering, the people, including also your mind, the thoughts that come, the emotions also, comes and goes. No form lasts that long. Before you know it, this retreat is over. First you looked forward to it, and then it's there. But since the world of form is governed by time, which is ultimately an illusion, just as form is ultimately an illusion, life is like an express train, it never stops, you're on it, and so one event goes past, and there's the retreat, here it is. It's over already, it's Sunday, and it's time to go home. if we could truly see reality, external reality, so-called, we would be shocked, deeply shocked. By truly see, I mean the way we perceive it is as if the world around us were solid. The buildings, the structures, economic companies, corporations, political, even the people have their job and their pension scheme and everything is in place, and it's very solid reality. And it's sometimes another example of solid reality is that death is a taboo, even now in Western culture, because it would show you that human bodies are not solid. They dissolve continuously around you. But you mustn't look at death. It's forbidden to see dead bodies. No, just death. And when it comes to people, they react as if they never knew that such a thing existed. He died. And nobody told them that it was some abstract truth in the head, distant, everybody does, okay, everybody does. But they live as if they're not the case at all. It's sometimes helpful to travel to India where they don't have a taboo and you see dead people openly. And it's the same here, they're dying everywhere, but they're shut away. Don't look. Pretend that nothing is happening. Another way why India is so wonderful to go to, and it's spiritually beautiful experience, is that the world of form is less predictable there. Here you have timetables and the trains run and everything. You can plan your trip. And there, it's, what's going on? Nothing goes as planned, and it's miraculously, in the end it works. As one Indian man said to me, we live by grace. He was talking to an Israeli person. The Indian man asked the Israeli man, what do you live by? And the Israeli man said, we live by guts. And and then he asked the Indian man, he said, oh, well, we live by grace. And there you see that the structures of the external world are not that stable after all. And of course it's the same here, it's an illusion, the stability is an illusion. And sometimes a structure that looks so permanent crumbles. Whether it's the communist system, or whether it's a building, or you lose your job, or your corporation suddenly, the multi-billion-dollar corporation collapses with your pension plan, everything. What we see is a kind of frozen view of the external world. If you saw a more realistic perspective, a speeded up version on film, you sometimes see it, how a flower opens. They speed up the film, and you see the flower coming out of the soil, opening, withering, and disappearing. And if you could see in that way a human existence, baby, and then running around for a few years, and then growing, wrinkles come, and like a fruit or a flower that goes old. Gone. And then just a little bit longer it would take before so-called heavy physical objects would also dissolve and become dust. This room, if you saw it speeded up, first the bodies would go, and then you have to just wait a few more seconds. And then gradually you see cracks appearing, things start falling down from the ceiling, and then the ceiling collapses, and then the room. And then there's only dust left, and then the wind comes, and so you would see everything is already in the process of dissolving. Continuous birth and death. And humans are stuck in there somewhere and say, this is reality here. When you see that fact in the sublime teaching of the Buddha called impermanence, you're astonished when you see it. And you allow it to be. It is liberating to see that. To the egoic entity, it's a dreadful thing. Don't be so negative, don't talk about these things. And yet, if you allow that, and you see how forms come and go, how the entire universe is that play of forms, and everything dissolves as that form, something in you feels good, it feels very peaceful to see that. How is it even possible to see it? To witness that? I talk about that briefly in Stillness Speaks, the book. If the entire world were blue, you would not see the color blue. You need something that's not blue so that you can recognize blue. If everything were impermanent, you wouldn't even know it. How can you know impermanence? Because there's something in you that is not impermanent, but it has nothing to do with your form. The form is impermanent. And that's the beauty of death. It frees that which was trapped in the form. And that is the beauty of watching and allowing the impermanent nature of the world to be. Even to witness death puts you in touch with the deathless, formless